Next, from the press briefing room at the state capitol, State Senator Sen Manar calls on opponents of Senate Bill 16 to support the legislation that would change the state's education funding formula, requiring the state to make 92% of public school funding need-based. This runs about 40 minutes.
Those who don't agree with that principle should stop pretending that they do. Let me remind the co-sponsors of House Resolution 1276, which was the resolution that was introduced in I think it was 2 weeks ago in the House, that denounces, they use the word denounces Senate Bill 16. Let me remind the co-sponsors and everybody here of our process in the Senate that began on April the 11th, 2013. Senate Joint Resolution 32 was introduced in the Senate with bipartisan co-sponsorship to create the Education Funding Advisory Committee that was made up of 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, equal numbers, Democrats and Republicans, representing the diverse state that we live in, to set us on a path with a deadline to produce a bill that would spark a debate that we haven't had in nearly 20 years in Illinois. That was April the 11th of 2013. In August of 2013, the EFAC committee began its hearings. I believe there were 7 in total. I believe if you were to total up the number of public hours of public testimony that we had in front of the EFAC committee, I believe it was 40 hours of public testimony. Hundreds of documents were submitted. Hundreds of individuals came to testify. There was not a single person who was denied the ability to testify in front of the EFAC hearings. Not a single person was denied the ability to testify. Not a single idea was rejected. Not a single person was told that they couldn't appear or present an idea. This is all documented on the State Board of Education's website. There's a chronology, there's a list of documents, there's a list of individuals who testified. The EFAC hearings, and this is a testament to all 8 members were open and transparent, and I think that's important when we talk about any issue in government, let alone one as complicated and as difficult as education funding reform. There was a deadline. There was a deadline that we put on ourselves of producing a report by February 1st of 2014. So over the course of those months in the fall and winter of 2013, we compiled a report. And on January 31st of 2014, one day early to the February 1st deadline, the EFAC committee issued its report with 8 signatures, 8 bipartisan signatures of members of the Senate. That was a difficult task, And as soon as that report was issued, and I would encourage the co-sponsors of the House resolution to read this report, read it in its entirety. The report came under criticism, which is okay. That's okay in my book. There's things in this report. If you rewind the clock back to February 1st of 2014, I stood right here and said there's things in this report that I don't agree with necessarily. But I, like the other members of the EFAC committee, believed it was important to move the ball down the field and continue a discussion, enforce a discussion at the General Assembly. It took 2 months after the report was issued to draft the bill. So the months of February and March of 2014, language was drafted and was put together to reflect this report in its entirety, And that language was filed on April the 2nd of 2014, and that's what became Senate Bill 16. So my point here is this, excuse me, this was a process that began in April of 2013. So this idea that Senate Bill 16 just fell out of the sky and fell on to school districts is complete nonsense. This was a product of experts. This was a product of outside groups and individuals that are nonpartisan, that came to us and said, this is what you need to change in Illinois. There was no politics in this report. And I'm proud of that. And I commend my 7 members of the Senate that I serve with for serving on the EFAC committee and for the hours that they put into this. One other point. During the time between when the report was issued and the bill was filed, Senator Luchtefeld and I appeared in front of a joint, on 2 occasions, in front of a joint committee of of the House Education and Appropriations Committee, where we presented the report and we presented updates on the bill. And there are co-sponsors of House Resolution 1276, 5 in total, who were at those committee hearings whenever we presented this report. So the idea that there was no collaboration or that there was no effort to include opinions in a diverse state like Illinois, again, is complete nonsense coming from the co-sponsors of the House resolution. So back to April the 2nd of 2014, Senate Bill 16 was introduced. In April and May, we had multiple committee hearings, hours of committee hearings. I believe we had one subcommittee hearing where there was 3 hours of public testimony, and about 2/3 of that time was Senator Murphy and I having an exchange on the merits of the bill, specifics in the bill, things that ought to change in the bill, and those changes that were suggested during that debate were incorporated into the bill into amendments. And on May 27th, Senate Bill 16 was called for a vote in the Senate, and it passed, I believe, with a 32-vote number. And on May 28th, the bill arrived in the House the very next day. And that's where it's been since that day, right before we adjourned session. A couple of relevant facts that I feel compelled to remind everyone of this morning. Our funding formula, and this doesn't matter if you're on one side of the debate or the other, if you're Democrat or Republican. These are facts that we exposed during the course of our hearings, not through a political lens, not through the lens of an election, not through the lens of politics, which exercises itself every day in this building where we find ourselves this morning. But we said to experts and to outside, people who just want to come and tell us how to do things better and how to spend our money better, we said, tell us what to do. So here's a couple of points that I think have not been said enough since May of 2014. Our funding formula hasn't changed in nearly 20 years. It's been about 2 decades. But we are still distributing money the same way we were in 1997, despite the fact that Illinois' population has changed, that wealth and poverty across the state has changed dramatically. We are still distributing money the same way we were to public schools in 1997. That's not a good way to do business. Number 2, we own a system that is the least equitable system in the country. That's a fact. We own it. It's time the members of the General Assembly, regardless of the district that they represent or the party that they belong to, own the fact that we have the least equitable system in the country. Number 3, this came to us through a report that was given to us at our second hearing, September 2013. I would urge the co-sponsors of the resolution in the House to read this report as well. That districts that make a lower tax effort in Illinois tend to raise higher amounts of local revenue. That is a critical point. That's a critical point that we have to remember. Districts that make a lower tax effort in Illinois tend to raise higher amounts of local revenue. That's at the root of what we're trying to solve here. And then finally, only 42% of our spending uses need as a criteria for how it is distributed. That ranks us last in the country. Only 42% of state spending uses need as a criteria for how it is distributed. That is last in the country. We can do better than that in Illinois. A couple of closing remarks, and then I'll be happy to take questions. A year ago, if I would have came to the Blue Room and had a press conference to say that we're going to tackle education funding reform, and that's something that I wanted to be a part of, a lot of people would have said, of course it is. That's what everybody wants to be a part of when they run campaigns. Just about everybody who comes to the General Assembly at one time or another complains about how bad our school funding system is and promises. They promise to make it better. So let me be clear about this. If you run on education funding as a candidate, you shouldn't run from it as a legislator. Despite your party, despite where you live, despite the district that you represent, you have to acknowledge that our system is broken, and to change it, it's going to require constructive criticism to make it better. And that requires everybody having a seat at the table, everybody being part of a discussion, everybody giving their point of view to get us to a better place as a state. We are a lot closer today than we were a year ago at reaching this goal. We're not there yet, but minimally, Senate Bill 16 has sparked a debate around the state that has, in a very heavy way, engaged the Senate as a chamber, that is now engaging the House, and is now engaging local districts on a daily basis. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't have a conversation, multiple conversations, with superintendents across the state about the specific contents of Senate Bill 16. Not platitudes, which we're getting from many members of the House, not speaking in political terms, but specifics of Senate Bill 16 and how we make it as good as we can, knowing that we have to get this right. This can't be a us versus them fight or a them versus us fight. Illinois cannot have an island of schools that are well-funded and a sea of others that aren't. That is not acceptable to me as a legislator. It should be unacceptable to every member of the legislature. But this cannot be an us versus them or a them versus us fight. This is not about one district being better than another, or one district, doing things extraordinary while others, for some reason, lag behind. This has to be a comprehensive conversation, absent of politics, getting at the root of the problem that we face, which is we have the least equitable system in the country. Moving forward, I would hope and I would expect, as the House members continue to meet, remember I said that the bill arrived in the House on May the 28th. We haven't had session since then. There's been multiple meetings taking place from a House committee standpoint, and I would expect that there would be a hearing on the bill during veto session. That would be the first opportunity for the House to have a public hearing. Where the bill goes beyond that depends on the level of engagement of members of the General Assembly. Minimally, though, everybody should acknowledge that this is a conversation whose time has come in Illinois. We can't go on with the system that we have. It will not produce a better state. It does not produce better schools. It does not produce students that are well equipped for today's economy. It has to change. Be happy to take any questions.
Senator, what would you say to those who say that the districts, that said, basically what you're trying to do is take money away from the northern districts that have more money, redistribute the wealth down to the southern districts, and that is inherently unfair to those who invested in their homes, and their property values are based upon the quality of the education. They're paying high property taxes to support their local schools, and that the downstate people ought to take care of their own schools. So this is just a money back from north to south.
Well, the idea that this is a money, well, let me say that's too simplistic. That's too simplistic of an explanation of what Senate Bill 16 is trying to accomplish. We are not three cohesive groups in Illinois. This conversation, goes right into a ditch if we're going to describe Illinois as one large city, a set of suburbs, and a vast area of downstate. That's not the state we live in. There are variables in each of those components that are accounted for in Senate Bill 16. So that's too simplistic of an argument, number one. Number two, I would just make the argument again that Illinois, by the way, has some of the best school districts in the world. That's a fact too. There are some of the best school districts on the face of the planet in Illinois, and that makes our state a better place. But we cannot have a few that excel and so many more every year that struggle to do what they're expected to do because the legislature doesn't have the will to change the formula, which is at the root of so many problems we face. So from that regard, we have to change what we do. I don't think anybody would say that we can only have a small handful of districts and a formula that's being defended by a select few and call that a successful system of public education. It isn't. And then number three, I don't view there wasn't a single expert that came in front of EFAC and produced this report that said that our system is legitimate today. Nobody's saying it's a legitimate way to spend money, whether you have $7 billion or $12 billion or $100 million. Nobody said to us, not a single person, that the way we do it today is the way we ought to do it. So I don't view today's system as legitimate. Now, we have to put heads together, and we got to get this right, and we have to keep this conversation going. No, I'm not angry. I'm impatient, and I think that reflects the feeling of a vast majority of educators and superintendents and legislators. I'm impatient that reform takes this long, that we know that the system is as flawed and old and broken as it is, and yet it's difficult to accomplish a reform. So I'm not angry, but I am impatient. I think the time has come to push the status quo aside and replace it with something. What I would have liked to have seen in the House resolution is, a list of things that those co-sponsors would be willing to change.
Well, it sounds like, the last 20 minutes, it sounds like you've been saying just that very thing to the House Republicans. Back off, take a breath, be patient. Everybody's had a seat at this table. We're still working on this. Which are you? Are you patiently working forward and hoping to bring everybody together?
Yeah, and the first point is it's taken the Senate over a year. It took the Senate a year to fully debate the bill and pass the bill. So it's going to take the House some time. But that's not what that resolution says. That resolution, I think the word in Representative Sandek's press release was denounces, and we hear the word devastate and stop, as if there isn't a problem to fix. So I think the way we ought to do this is, I think the co-sponsors of the resolution should read the work that Democrats and Republicans put into this effort in the Senate and the House during the course of our hearings. And I think they would come to an understanding that we indicted the system. The system has clearly been indicted today, but that's not good enough. It's not good enough to complain. It's not good enough to run on education funding reform. You have to put a solution on the table, and that's what Senate Bill 16 is designed to do. There's some work that needs to be done on the bill. That's part of the continued conversation. But the idea that the effort should stop is something that everyone on its face should reject, and that's how I read the House resolution.
When you say work to do, are you talking about bringing in, can you be specific that you're at 92% base study, can it go down to like 80 or 85? Or what are you talking about that would make some of these people who think their districts are losing the most happy?
Well, I think a couple of things, Bernie. So potential changes in the bill. I'll give you one specific. Excuse me. If you go back to the hearing in Waterloo, which was our last hearing, there was a proposal brought forward to account for regional, what we call a regional cost differential between districts in the state. So, for example, it costs a lot more money to hire a teacher in most suburban districts than it does in other parts of the state. So other states, our peer states, account for that because personnel costs are such a high percentage of what a school district has in expenditures. So there was a proposal to incorporate that into the report, and that was rejected. I think it was rejected because there were specifics lacking. So since that time, that was, rewind the clock, January of 2014. Since that time, there's been some work to try to put that together. I think that should be a part of the discussion that could be added to the bill that would, again, not designed to drive money to one district or another, but to have a true accounting of costs of school district, and personnel obviously is the largest. So that's what I mean. I think Senate Bill 16 is designed in a fashion that reflects the report, which reflects our hearings, which reflects what experts told us we should be doing. So I think the basis of the bill is sound. I think in the more I go through the state, there's very logical reasons as to why it's doing what it's doing. I didn't make this stuff up. Nobody who sat on the EFAC hearings, the 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans just made stuff up to put it in a bill to drive money someplace. There are reasons why the bill does what it does. And I think those things should stay in place. But there's other things, too, that were brought to us in the hearings that I think we have time to work on, and we have been working on.
Senator, Representative Ron Sandak just tweeted.
I'm shocked.
This bill is not reform, but rather reallocation, kind of the point I was just making, as far as what the critics were saying. What reforms do you feel, aside from the distribution of funds, what reforms are in education And I think a lot of those who were on the other side of this argument would say, we need a lot of reforms, not just spending money the way we've been spending it, and giving more money down south. Unless, that they would argue, in essence, we've got holes in the bottom of the bucket. There's no point in just pouring water into that bucket until we fix the holes and we actually reform this.
So they're not arguing that, Terry. That's not what they're arguing. You know, first of all, I have not had a conversation with Representative Sandek about the bill.
That was going to be another.
Yeah. He hasn't tweeted me. He hasn't Facebook messaged me.
I mean, here we are, and we're kind of in a battle, political battle over an important issue. And it's kind of surprising. Can you talk about the process of bringing together education reform in the Illinois legislature and reaching across the aisle? Have you reached across the aisle, and can you just also discuss how we got to this?
Yeah, every day. You know, I mentioned, I'll go back to the representative in a second, but I just mentioned that, you know, we had a meeting, I think it was 2 weeks ago, tomorrow in Evanston, and that Evanston meeting hosted by Senator Biss, and you know, I think there's over 100 people there, board members, superintendents from the area. That was a constructive dialogue, and this folder, I've been carrying around this blue folder, you know, for well over a year, and these are the notes from meetings that we try to address in the proper manner in the bill. But I don't think that's what, let me go back to your other question, I don't think that's what Representative Sandak is saying. If he wants to defend the status quo to his taxpayers, then he should do that. And if he wants to spend more money on schools, then he should stand up and say so. I don't think that's what he's saying. What we've tried to do, and matter of fact, you know, I think I should say that I took some heat in the Senate Democratic caucus because many thought that our approach was too conservative. You know, it's rather conservative to say that we're not going to spend more money without ensuring that the money we spent is spent in a meaningful manner. So we were very disciplined about that in our hearings. That is a very conservative approach to a very complicated problem. There were a lot of people that said that, you know, we should do vouchers, we should have school choice, we should, you know, have, you know, 3 times as many charters in the state. There were others that came to us and said, well, you need to go put $3 billion more, as if we had it, into public schools, above and beyond what we spend today. And those 2 points of view, those 2 points of reference came to us on many occasions, but we didn't do that in the EFAC hearings. What we said was, let's focus in a disciplined and pragmatic way on how the law directs money to be spent, knowing that what we do today doesn't match the challenges that we face. So we didn't say spend more. We didn't say to spend less. We said let's first focus on how we spend what we have. That's a very conservative way to approach a very difficult and complicated problem. And it should be mentioned too that you know, Representative Welch, you know, his response was that he wants to have more money going to schools, not less. And I agree with him. We need more money going to schools, not less. But we could pump more money into the formula today, as it is today, and it's never going to get to the districts that need it the most. So it's not simply, let's go pump money into the system. That's not going to fix the system, because that will not get to the districts that need it the most until we change the directions on where it's supposed to go. And that calls for a change in the funding formula.
Senator, obviously a lot of schools are facing financial struggles. In talking with a number of superintendents, they've said that most of these struggles started with proration, you know, between 5 and 6 years ago. If proration had taken place, there'd be more money in districts.
That requires more money. That requires more money to be spent. And proration is I would argue, the most devastating thing that's ever happened to public education in Illinois. It's devastating. And it's been a result of a budget that's been tight. It's been a result of many, many challenges that we faced with state finances. But it puts inequity on hyperdrive. And we have to change that. So, anybody could stand behind this mic and complain about it. Anybody could stand here and say proration's terrible, or we don't have an adequate amount of spending in public education today, but that's not going to change where we are. That's not going to put reform into motions. Words don't change things. Action on the part of the legislature changes things. That's what we need to have happen.
Not that Representative Sandek wouldn't want to be here, but Illinois Observer quotes him this morning saying that it's $140 million in hard-earned taxpayer dollars taken from people who live in District 81 and other DuPage County legislative districts. It's an unfair reallocation of limited state aid, and it's an unacceptable shortcut solution. And I think he said it all goes to, it's 140 million state dollars away from DuPage, and I think he said mostly to Chicago public schools. Yeah. True, false?
No, that's false. That's false. You can't hold up the printout on one hand and ignore it in the other. Look at the printout.
That was handed out to us this morning, I think from your side of things, is they're talking about in District Northwest Suburban High School, District 214, figuring out if they should build a swimming pool or other things with $45 million in excess funds. What's the point of us seeing this, and what are you saying about suburbs versus downstate or other places?
So back to the previous question. Proration is a major issue that we face. That's going to take a larger conversation with the state budget. But when you get to the core of what we're trying to deal with here is the idea that we have some districts, and I'm not pointing this out because it's good or bad. Okay, I'm just pointing this out to expose the fact that the Daily Herald has provided extensive coverage on the House resolution and some of the corresponding press conferences and quotes and press releases that have gone on about the dangers of Senate Bill 16. But I would point you to the August 22nd edition of the Daily Herald, where District 214 has $45 million of surplus funds. And there's an article that states that they're gonna build swimming pools and AstroTurf and some other things, which is that's fine. That's fine for the district. But what we have to balance that against is we have districts in all parts of the state, not just in some parts of the state, where there isn't a single art teacher, not a single art teacher. There could be a child that enrolls in the Mulberry Grove School District in kindergarten, and when they graduate as a senior, they will have never taken an art class. That's unacceptable to me. It ought to be unacceptable to Ron Sandek. It ought to be unacceptable to Leader Durkin and Leader Radonio. That should be unacceptable to all of us. There are districts in the state that open up, kids open up history books that are 20 years old, not because they don't manage their finances well. That's not the fault of a school board. Some of the feedback I'm hearing is, well, if the school district's poor, that's because they don't manage their finances well. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. The root of our problem is the state aid formula. The reason why districts in Wabash County have books that are 20 years old is because the state aid formula punishes them every year. And that needs to change. We can't have that in Illinois.
One other thing, legislature's not in session now, there is an election going on. I know that they're pushing this at this time, but why are you doing this now in the middle of an election season? The legislature's not even here to handle it right now.
Why am I doing it?
Yeah.
Well,
Why
I didn't introduce the House resolution. So, yeah, I'm here today because I think there's some people that are trying to steer this conversation into the ditch, and we can't have that happen. Vince DiMuzio said many times that it's easier to kill a bill than to pass one, and that's not going to happen with this bill. This has to continue, and Senate Bill 16 is forcing a conversation on the state that is difficult. I recognize this is difficult, but we have to have a conversation that's meaningful, that is inclusive, which is what we started in April of 2013, and that leads us to a better outcome. That's why I'm standing here, is to say that we have to stay on course, we have to be disciplined, we have to understand that owning the least equitable system in the country is a problem for everybody in the state, no matter where you live.
Just to be clear, this doesn't change the amount of money the state spends.
No.
One way or the
Good
other.
point. Good point. I should have said that in the beginning. Senate Bill 16 doesn't raise or lower spending in the state budget. It doesn't ask for more spending. It doesn't ask for less. It just says however much we have in a given year, which changes every year, it matters how we spend it. And so whether we have a whole lot or a whole little in the state budget, for whatever reason, how we distribute it makes a big difference when it comes to outcomes for students.
Which is a reallocation.
With no new money. No new money. But we do that every year. You know, this idea that school funding is static is completely false. Every year, the state aid formula recalculates itself, and there are winners and losers. It just so happens today that the districts that can least afford the loss are the ones that are losing. Those with the highest tax rates, those with the highest amounts of poverty, those that have the most critical challenges that were outlined in this report and the bill are the ones that receive less money every year when the state aid formula recalculates. So this idea that the state aid formula is some static thing that doesn't change is completely false.
Have you
Senator,
counted
can you
out
talk about what, we talk about the politics a lot. If this bill were to pass, how would Illinois education be different than it is today?
It would be very different. It's you know, the bill is a profound change, but it's an appropriate change, and it reflects the fact that we haven't changed things in a very long time. Here's how I think Illinois would change. I think we would take a major step toward greater equity. It's not going to be complete equity, but it would be a major step toward greater equity. I think you would see money being prioritized in places that have high poverty, which is what experts and non-biased sources came to us and told us we ought to do. I think there would be a positive outcome in those communities. And I think we would begin to address the issue that inequity doesn't produce a positive result. Then what I think would happen is we would have a real debate about how much we spend in the first place on schools, an adequacy conversation, which oftentimes gets confused with equity. Equity and adequacy are two very different things. Adequacy deals with how much we put in the budget, given all the factors that the General Assembly has to deal with. Adequacy deals with a budget number, an appropriation. Equity deals with the law and how the law either embraces equality or it doesn't. The law either embraces equity and equality or it doesn't. In this case, today, it does not. So I think once we have a formula that matches priorities of a diverse state, then we can have the debate about how much we put into that formula. And that's stymied today because why would a legislator who knows that driving more money into a broken formula, knows that it'll never get to his or her school districts, why would they say, let's go spend more? It's a pointless conversation. So we have to fix the formula, and then we have to have a conversation about how much we spend on schools in the first place. And this is a fact, you know, about 25%. So if this is all we spend, about this much comes from the state, about this much comes from local property taxpayers and from the federal government. That's an out of whack situation. We have to address that.
Have you counted your allies in the House yet?
Yeah. We had House participation at every one of our hearings. You know, there's a continuous, and when I say there's a daily conversation, I mean it. There's a daily conversation.
Do you have a tally of likely yes votes then?
No, I don't. Again, it took us a year. It took us a year in the Senate. It's going to take some time. But this is not something that, whether it's during a campaign season or during the middle of the summer in July, this is not something that anyone should say we should just stop. That's not going to get us to where we need to go.
Do you acknowledge that someone will lose, will get less money? Or are you saying that you can have a bill where no one's ox gets gored? I mean, Ron Sandet, it might be the right thing for Ron Sandet to vote for more equity downstate. He might feel better in his conscience, but his conscience doesn't vote.
Right.
How does he face his voters and say, we're going to send more money to Wabash County because that's the right thing to do?
Well, a couple of things. If you don't have more money, in the system, then the answer is yes. And I mean, it's just a fact. That's just math. And but you know, there's a greater conversation we have to have that, you know, if we have the most severely challenged districts in the state that continue to struggle with their finances, and they can't produce graduates with skills to to be employed, employable skills, then are we really going to get at the root of the unemployment rate? You know, are we really going to address issues in the correctional system? Are we really going to get at the true cost drivers in the state budget? The answer is no. So whether you have, you serve a district that has high property wealth or one that doesn't, you have to acknowledge that there's a cost to not getting this right in the state budget. And it's immense and it's severe. And until we get this right and we drive resources to districts that, if they had them, could change the outcome, then we're never going to get at the root of many of the problems we face in the state budget, which is the correctional system, which is unemployment, which is the Medicaid system, all of those things. And I don't think it's any coincidence that in many of the districts in the state that also have the highest unemployment are the ones that are suffering the most under today's formula. I don't think that's a coincidence. When a business wants to come to Illinois, where do they want to go? They want to go where there's good public schools. When they want to expand, where do they go? They want to go where there's good public schools, where their employees' kids, attend classes, and where they can hire graduates with skills. So that can't be a luxury for just a few. That's something that every community in Illinois should have the opportunity to do. Say, we have a quality school system, we can give you graduates that have skills, and you can send your kids here. That's not the case today in Illinois, and it's time we talk about that.
So you're saying basically that investing more in high poverty schools
Yeah.
is good for the entire state?
It's good for it's absolutely is. And I'm not just saying that because, it sounds good, right? I'm not just saying that because it sounds good. I'm saying it because people came to us and said, this is how you ought to do it. This is how you ought to change your formula. This is where you will have the most meaningful expenditure of a dollar in public education.
So I guess what does Ron Sandak's district get out of that if we do send more money to, say, Wabash?
Well, again, I don't view today's system as a legitimate way to measure, up or down. The only reason it exists is because nobody has had the will to change it. So that's not legitimate in my mind. But generally speaking, if we can do this right, that's going to help the whole state. It's going to help the state budget. It's going to make the state more attractive to businesses. Not owning the least equitable system in the country is going to make us a better state.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.